Hi, everybody. This is Nate Chamberlain. Thank you for joining us for this lunch hour webinar on best practices in SharePoint migration, courtesy of Novigo Solutions. I'm pleased to have Akdas Asif with me today. He's going to be presenting the slides, and I'll go ahead and hand it over to him.
Thanks, Nate. Hi, everyone. So I will be taking this session on best practices in SharePoint migration, both on-premise to on-premise as well as on-premise to online, when any organization wants to move to a higher version of SharePoint. So in this session, I will be covering the migration basics and how a tool can make the migration effortless. Also, I would be covering a basic overview on the challenges, the planning, and the steps that one has to take when they're looking for migration. So the agenda for today's webinar would be introduction, challenges that usually the SharePoint migration faces, different migration steps that has to be followed, best practices that we could include while we are planning for SharePoint migration, how Sharegate as a tool can make migration easier, since Novigo is a Sharegate partner and we have successfully used Sharegate in multiple projects with a high success ratio. So we recommend Sharegate in tools. And finally, we would have question and answer session where if there are any questions, the audience could ask me. So to start, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Akdas Asif. So I've been working as a senior consultant with Novigo Solutions. And Novigo Solutions is end-to-end analytics and IT services company. So we have had our headquarters in Dallas, Texas, and offices in Dubai, KSA, and delivery centers in India. So we have it's founded in 2012, it's close to 7 years now. And we have had large SharePoint migration projects in Middle East and US, including redevelopment of the intranet portal along with it. So this was a brief introduction about the company and me. So to start with the SharePoint Migration Map. So if at given a point of time, if anybody wants to migrate to the higher version of SharePoint, this would be a key map wherein we need to migrate to an intermediate version if we are using Microsoft's recommended database content restore method. So if the organization is in SharePoint 2007 and they want to migrate to 2010, that's an immediate upgrade. But if they want to migrate to 2013, then they would have to have a temporary intermediary stop in 2010, have some procedures done there, and then move to 2013. So there's no direct way from SharePoint 2007 to 2013, except if we're using a tool to migrate. Also, given are the dates when support has been terminated or it's nearing termination. So any organization that is currently on 2007 is highly recommended to start the migration procedure as per Microsoft. And if we are moving to SharePoint Online from any given environment, then it's the tool-based approach only. It could be Microsoft's inbuilt tool or any third-party tool available in the market that could be used for migration. So coming over to what are the challenges of a SharePoint migration project. So broadly, there are 4 challenges. Gathering application inventory. So the biggest challenge for any organization would be knowing how much of inventory they hold, because as years pass by, a lot of data is accumulated, and some of them is unused, some of them is lying in a situation where it's not managed properly. So an inventory of all that is a complicated task, but it is of utmost necessity. So this is something vital and has to be done. And this is not limited to data alone. It could be applications, third-party extensions. So everything what has been used in the current environment has to be made a note of. Size and complexity of the application. So SharePoint out-of-the-box templates are easy to migrate, but the complexity arises when you have a lot of custom developed applications. Those are to be migrated. Now, a SharePoint application will be complex to migrate if it broadly has these elements. So if you have heavily customized master pages and page layouts, then that would be an additional challenge and additional effort to migrate it to the next environment. If you have custom solutions like web parts, features, event handlers, site templates, page controls, some modules that make use of JavaScript, CSS, content types, info path forms, for example, all these add to the complexity. of the application being migrated. Selecting the best fit for migration approach. There are a lot of approaches as we discussed, but selecting the best fit is of a key importance. You could either go for the database restore method, where in this case where you would be having easier migration, but you get all of the legacy data or the bulk of the data into the destination environment, and you need to kind of custom handle the custom applications or customizations one by one. If you go with a tool-based approach, it could require a better planning, investment in the product, but allows you to have a total control of the data that you want to migrate. So selecting the best fit is dependent on the type of the project, the complexity, and the budget. Often, organizations have gone for hybrid approaches where they migrate some of the content or some of the components using the database restore and some of them using the tools. Migration planning challenges. So, SharePoint migration becomes complex if you have applications of sites to be migrated in hundreds and thousands. So often huge organizations have lots and lots of sites, and planning such a migration is a tedious task. Also, organizations are geographically distributed, with each location having or using a subset of that SharePoint environment. So again, it's a challenge in getting everyone on board for migration. All this adds to the planning complexity. Additionally, if the requirement is for planning, migrating multilingual applications, then not only the migration plan has to be proper, but also the tool, if in case we're using the tool-based approach, needs to be checked that it supports multilingual migrations. Along with that, we need to also check for the farm design, taxonomy, capacity planning, backup and disaster management. How are the users going to be trained? How are we planning to get sign-off? How are the site owners going on board on this? So everything adds to the migration challenges. So broadly, these are the 4 challenges that any SharePoint migration project could face. Coming over to the options, I'll briefly discuss what are our options. So on-premise to on-premise, we have 2 options as I discussed earlier. So you could use content database restore approach, which is straightforward. You take a backup of all the databases, restore it to the destination environment. In case the higher environment is not immediate one, then you need to use the intermediary. The example I just gave was if I'm moving from 2007 to 2013, then I need to have a stop at 2010, repeat all the approaches, and then move to 2013. Or I could take a tools-based approach where I can take a third-party tool out of the market and start migration in phases. But for on-premise to online, there's only one option, that we need to use a tool. It could be Microsoft's inbuilt tool or any third-party tool for that matter. So what are the broad migration steps that we need to consider when we are planning for a SharePoint migration? So briefly, we divide the entire SharePoint migration into these steps. So we have analysis, planning, migration, customization, which is optional if there is any customization. Usually customization also has, usually is done before migration or during migration. Validation, which is most crucial, and post-migration steps. So in analysis, as I discussed, we need to have complete inventory list formed for the source environment, as well as understand the destination environment of how it would be, what would be the configurations required, how much of data do we have, how much do we need to move, is there any modification we need to do, is there any mapping, is there any change in the structure, or is the data going to be residing in a separate location in the destination. So a complete inventory report on the source, as well as how it would look like in destination, has to be prepared. Also, we need to make sure if all the items we plan to migrate would be compatible and supported. If not, what is our backup plan? Are we going to depreciate it, or are we going to customize it in such a way that it would be supported in the new environment? Also, migration is the best time to plan for changes. So if there is anything which needs change, migration is the best time. For example, if there are large subsites, then it's a good time to promote them to site collection. So usually migration is a good time when you could plan this and do the necessary changes in the destination environment, so that the usage of SharePoint continues to be smoother in the new environment. We need to conduct capacity planning, as I discussed, of number of users, how many sites we have, what are our site collections, number of databases. So usually what happens is often organizations have site collections, you know, one content database having more than one site collection, which is not a good practice. So usually each content database has to reside only one site collection. But if that's the case, this could be avoided in the new destination environment when we are planning for SharePoint migration. Or if a content database is exceeding a certain limit, which is kind of a site collection being a large, we could split one site collection into more than one. So splitting of site collection not only helps us manage the database better, but also improves the performance and the overall data management. What is our plan for future? Is there any user? Are we expecting any spurt in the user growth? How is our site growing? So it's a good time to sit down with the site owners and kind of get their inputs on how they're expecting the site would grow in terms of data, in terms of user. So that would kind of help us in planning how we need to do it in the destination as well. Also, in the source environment, we would have data being just dumped on, or the list not being created in a better way using columns repeatedly, where we could have used content types and site columns. All this play a vital role when we are planning for search in the destination environment. So if there is something which is repeatedly used and it could be mapped to a site column or a content type, then that has to be done in the destination environment so that the search works in a better way, and the user experience for the search is better than what it was in source. So it's actually a good time to analyze the SharePoint data from that angle as well. And finally, we need to map the hardware and topology needs based on how our organization demands. We need to also kind of do a pre-upgrade check on this checklist of how our content sources are, what are the URLs and addresses, how is our Office server topology, what are the servers in the current farm, our SharePoint version and all the components that are running, different third-party applications, if there are any language packs, identifying any alternate access mappings, if there are any outlining any customization, it could be on the list views or field types, identifying the topology, a complete list of content databases and their server locations. When we come to the customizations broadly, we need to cover these checklists on our customizations so that we know if there are any customizations, and if any, how do we plan to handle them. So it could be UI-based customizations, web parts, workflows, if we're using any third-party workflows like Nintex, any business applications, third-party tools, again, custom features, site definitions, any solutions which is custom-based, and if we are connected to any database applications like file server and so on. Planning for the right migration. So with all the analysis that we do, we finally could plan the right migration approach, whether we would go for a tool-based or a database attached restore method. So a lot of factors define this, including the time we have, the go live window, downtime, the data size, number of custom applications, hardware topology, and so on. So this is the right time after the analysis to plan for the right kind of migration. We can always go for the hybrid approach if it's the best case. We need to plan for the metadata tagging and taxonomy. So as I said, metadata has to be planned better in the destination environment because a lot would have changed over the years, and migration is a good time to kind of rework on the metadata tagging and taxonomy because the organization structure would have changed, the way the data has been mapped would have been changed. So it's a good time to plan this as well. Finally, before we start the migration, it's always good to have a staging environment which kind of takes in consideration all the hardware aspects, the network aspects, if there is any hosting related. So if there is an organization that is spread geographically, then it's always a good approach to have a staging which is taking the actual scenario in consideration with the data center point of view, how much downtime or end user impact the staging environment causes, so that we can have an approximate real-time figure of what would be the actual production downtime How is our communication working? So if we need to communicate with the database team, the network team, how is our communication and coordination for the staging? And how is our backup and recovery mechanism if something goes wrong? So all this on a staging environment sets us on a good note for the actual migration. So this is taken from Sharegate's philosophy of having a three-phased approach when we do a migration. This is the best fit is we either remove the data that is not required, we migrate the data that is needed, and we rebuild the items that cannot be migrated as is. So this is a simple approach. If we just have a checklist for each and every item, we could remove them, rebuild, or migrate. So that's the simplest approach, and it has worked wonders for our SharePoint migration, which we did for one of the largest banks. So there was close to 1 TB of data, and we cleaned out almost 250 GB of data, rebuilt almost another 200 GB, and finally migrated the remaining one as is. So that was one of the good cases where we actually had a practical success ratio in following this philosophy. Finally, once we have migrated everything, we need to do a validation. So validation would be more on the data and the custom applications. We need to closely work with the site owners in getting their confidence and sign off that everything is migrated, and they do a random check on all their data, libraries, and lists, and kind of get validated that yes, everything is migrated. A sanity check has to be done for all the code deployments and the custom applications that were migrated. Post migration, we need to do a final cleanup of everything has been missed. So it's a good time to go back to all the reports and check if everything has been migrated. We need to run scripts for all the custom applications we have planned. We need to deploy the custom code, whatever has been, what's necessary after the data has been migrated. We need to do a thorough end-to-end testing that everything is working as the way it was working in the source environment. So that kind of wraps us our migration. So this was our steps in migration. So some of the best practices I have put across based on my experience in some of the large-scale migration projects. So we need to increase the resource at these sources. So my source environment would have a certain configuration that I've been using for a long time. We have often faced when we used any tool approach or a database restore that resources were kind of getting throttled. So it's always good to increase your resources at the source hardware environment at least by 20%, so that the migration steps which you perform would not hamper the day-to-day working. So before you plan this migration, you would want to take reports, you would want to export some libraries. So everything that you do, especially if you're using a tool, that would increase up your resources. So it's better to keep the source environment at a level where the day-to-day working is not hampered, and you can parallelly do the pre-analysis and analysis at the source. So we had faced a scenario where we were running Sharegate to a very large extent, and there were some workflows that were getting stuck and kind of getting error out because Sharegate was consuming some of the bandwidth. This was in combination of heavy load that the users were already putting on the system. So that was a huge learning that it's always good to increase resources and be safe. Complete your workflow. So before you plan migration, the first thing we need to do is complete the workflows. Again, it's not practical getting all the users to complete the workflows, but more the workflows that are reaching the logical conclusion, the better. Because more often than not, what happens is when you migrate when you perform SharePoint migration, there would be a lot of cases where the workflows get into deadlock mode, they just get stuck, and you need to restart them. So that would not work in all the scenarios. Hence, completing the workflows before you do the migration is the best step. My third point is implementing a state machine in workflows is actually a continuation of the second point. So in case you feel that your user base is too huge, there is not enough control that you can exercise on all of them and get them to complete the workflows. And especially if you see the migration coming at least say 3 months in advance, it's always better to have the workflows modified and include state machine in them, so that when the migration happens, even if the workflows restart, you are actually restarting them in a state where the users can continue without much fuss. So if you're seeing a migration in say next quarter or so, you can migrate all your crucial workflows to implement a state machine in them. That way, even if you restart, you would be starting from a point which is not in the beginning, so that users can start working where they left. Having an option to bulk restart workflows, so even after taking all the precautions, if there is some need during the downtime where you need to restart all the workflows in bulk, you need to have an option configured for that. Usually it's a small custom script written in PowerShell or any other utility that you could write, but it's better to have this utility already planned ahead in case the need arises. Always maintain reports. So usually when we do a data migration, we maintain reports of what was migrated, when it was migrated. This not only kind of allows us to keep check, but helps us in the incremental migration, because what was migrated once, we just need to refer those reports and migrate. And whatever was removed from the system is automatically not a part of this report. And this report kind of becomes a check sheet in the downtime window to make sure that the final incremental migration is done on an accurate note. Map the users who left organization with their counterparts. So over the years, a lot of users and a lot of employees would have left the organization. Now, this is a good time for the data that they created or they modified or they own to be given to their counterparts or the people who have replaced them. In case there is no replacement or no mapping, you could actually form a team or a special admin who is owner of all the orphan data. So this migration window is actually the best time to map the data that was, the owner of the data owner is no more with the company, but it needs to be assigned to someone so that it could, continue in the system. Reassess the permissions. So again, over the years, a lot of permissions would have been given. The user either would have moved out of the company or moved to a different department. So it's always better to go back and check the permission matrix and see if the permissions are still valid and if the user who has permission actually needs to be there. So migration is the best time to actually do the reassessment and make sure the destination environment is kind of better configured in terms of permission. The next point I already covered is promoting large sites to site collection. So if there is a large subsite in one of the existing site collection, it is a good idea to promote it to a site collection so that the data management is easier and the data growth is handled in a much better way. Change the destination site structure to match the current organization hierarchy. So there might be a lot of new departments added, a lot of departments depreciated, some of the units being moved, some of the locations, new locations in terms of geography, in terms of department, in terms of business line. So organizations change and it's a good time to change the structure. So your site structure in the current source environment might not be your exact replication of the organization. So it's a good time to actually map it to the current one in the destination. Move the legacy data to a separate location. So this is again crucial, as you might have a lot of data that is not of immediate use, but you cannot discard it. It's of vital importance based on its history or the archives. So a good strategy would be either to move it to a separate location or have a record center created and move it there. So this is a good time to kind of collect all those data which is not required immediately, but at the same time cannot be discarded. So we could move it to a separate location where it is lying safely, but at the same time doesn't cause any overload or concern to the current system. Report unused data to owners. So a lot of times when we generate reports, we see that the items have been last modified 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Now all of them might not be useful, and it's just lying there because nobody bothered to delete it. So these kind of usually anything that is not modified in the last 3 years is an ideal candidate for being reported to site owners to kind of just check on them. Hey, do you need this data still? It's not modified the last 3 years, and 80% of the times it's the case that this data could be deleted. So a nice report of all the items that are modified, not modified since last 3 years, could be kind of given to the site owners or the data owners, and either proceed for deletion or move to the record center or the legacy site. Finally, why Sharegate? So as I said, Novigo has used Sharegate with a lot of success. So I'll just brief on how Sharegate helps us in migrations. So first and foremost, it will list your existing content. So what it does, it gets us a full picture of what we have and what how can we prepare the migration, and what will be the effort. So the inventory report by Sharegate kind of helps us in identifying all the key parameters like number of site collections we have, number of data we have, what is the workflows, what is the number of workflows, and giving you a snapshot of the entire system from the inventory point of view. It helps us catch potential migration errors. So there is something called the inventory report and pre-check migration report. So even without performing an actual migration, it would help you identify what would be the migration errors in case you proceed with the migration. This will allow you to plan better and take the steps just before you actually plan for migration, so that you could reduce the remediation efforts. So this is one of the very good features of Sharegate, where it allows you to identify the migration errors even before the migration can be actually done. Migrating at a good speed. Since Sharegate is a tool-based utility, it migrates at a very good speed, and it's automated as well. And the speed which we were able to achieve was 10 GB per hour, which allowed us a huge benefit when we were migrating 1 TB of data, as I said. And it not only it also gave us the flexibility of having a downtime of just 1 day, wherein we covered all the incremental migration for a huge organization. Sharegate also allows you to map the data. So when I said mapping the users who have left with the new users, that could be done. Or you could map the metadata. You could map the something is in a separate site in the source, but you could map that into a separate site in the destination. So any kind of mapping in terms of data and some of the structures is allowed in Sharegate. That gives you the flexibility in planning and actually carrying out the plan. Incremental migration. So one of the important use cases of Sharegate would be incremental migration. So I can just migrate something today, and then I can run migration tomorrow, and it would just migrate the things that would change. So the items that were modified or added only would be touched. Anything that was not modified or just as is would be remaining untouched. Schedule and automate. So again, you can schedule the migration plans and automate it. So even if you are not physically present in the system, the migration is still happening. Easy validation. So Sharegate reports are one of the comprehensive reports that we get. So we get up in detail what went wrong, how much was our success ratio, is there anything which we need to consider. So a complete holistic migration report is what Sharegate provides when we run migration with Sharegate, and that allows us to kind of do a post migration validation much easier. So that's why Novigo recommends Sharegate, and we are proud to say that we have had a large scale migration completed within just one day of downtime using Sharegate. So I think I would move on to Q&A now.
Akdas, did you say it was a 10 terabyte or 10 gigabyte per hour?
1 TB, 1 terabyte.
Oh, okay, gotcha. That's great. And how long have you been using Sharegate?
It's been 2 years, Nate. We have been using Sharegate.
Okay. I was really interested in what you were saying about an option to bulk restart workflows. Can you talk more about what that might look like?
Yes. So bulk restart workflows is basically in the downtime you would come across scenarios where you migrated some of the workflows into the destination, and if those workflows are huge in number and for some reason you just check out one or two and they appear to be either in a deadlock mode or they're not working as they're expected, so the immediate need is to restart them before the downtime window is closed. So to restart those workflows one by one is a huge pain. So we need to get a utility already in place which allows us to restart those workflows all at once if the need arises. Now how we did is we use Sharegate for this. What we did is, since we were migrating Nintex workflows, we had changed the condition to have a column so that if that column changes, the workflow should start. So what we did is we changed this trigger condition to the workflow to a column being modified. And then we modified this column using Sharegate at once for all the items in that particular library. So close to 5,000 workflows were restarted within a span of 2 minutes. So that's where a bulk restart workflow kind of saves you if there is something going wrong in the workflows at your destination environment.
Okay, if there are any attendees with questions, you can check the right-hand panel there. One just came in from Naveen. I'll pull this up here. Okay, how did you map content to modern tools like Teams, Yammers, etc.? Forms, Planner?
Can you just repeat the question to me?
Yep, it's how did you map content to modern tools like Teams, Yammers, Forms, Planner from the on-prem to online tools like that?
So we didn't come across a scenario where we were using Yammer, but there were teams, and we used the SharePoint Migration Tool, the Microsoft's migration tool for that, and some of them we used Sharegate. So for the workflows, we use Sharegate, but for the Microsoft tools such as Teams, we use the Microsoft migration tool.
And was there ever like a rule that you would have set up that said this kind of content fits best under Planner, and you had to map something where they previously didn't have Planner, but you were able to move content into it?
No, Nate, we didn't have any scenario like that.
Okay. And then Avinash is wondering if you can elaborate on incremental migration in SharePoint.
Yes, so incremental migration allows you to start planning your destination environment much before your go live window. So in our case, what we did was our destination environment was ready 1 month before the actual go live. So we had the destination environment set up. We started migrating the content, and we were performing incremental migration every week. So when we do an incremental migration, only the data that was changed compared to the last migration used to get moved. We did it by maintaining reports and specifically targeting the libraries which were modified. So we used to generate a report where we get, okay, let me know what was modified since my last migration. And all the libraries and lists that used to kind of come across in that report, those were migrated one by one using incremental migration approach, so that only the changed items in those lists were moved. So first we filter out what is changed, and then we move only those content in those libraries with the condition that, okay, in those libraries, just get me what was changed. So kind of reducing the scope with the benefit that the source environment is not getting any of the load, and the users are not getting hampered, but at the same time the destination is kind of always in sync every week with the source environment.
Okay, thank you. And are there any other questions from attendees? There's the chat function on the right or the questions panel if you want to submit anything. Okay, another question. What are the advantages of tool-based approach versus content database restore?
The biggest benefit of the tool-based approach is you can plan, as I said, the destination environment much in advance. That's the first big benefit. So your destination environment can be ready alongside your source environment. All you need is just a short downtime, which allows you to do that final incremental update, so that as soon as the users stop using the source system, you do the final incremental update and move it to the destination, and then switch on the destination for the users. So that's the one of the biggest benefits. The second benefit is you get the complete control of the data. You can map the data where you want it to reside. You can map the users, so you can actually do all the planning and organization in the tool and place the data however you like. But in the content database restore, you get to move the package as is. So the way it's been placed in the source system, it moves to the destination. No doubt it's quicker, but it carries a lot of junk, a lot of legacy systems, and so on. So I would like to share a scenario here. This was for one of the petroleum chemical companies we had in Middle East. They had 100 GB of junk data because of shredded storage, because the SharePoint 2010 did not have shredded storage functionality. They had certain libraries that were holding, close to 900 versions of each item, where the modification was not even related to the actual file. Only the metadata was to get changed, and it in turn created versions of each file as a separate entity in the backend database, which ballooned the entire database size to almost 100 GB higher than what it was, because 2010 did not have this shredded storage. Now, in such a scenario, if I would have to take a backup of this database and move it to 2013, even the junk file that is there in 2010 would move as is. Even though the SharePoint 2013 uses shredded storage, I would not be able to use it because my data is already carrying those legacy and outdated stuff. But you do a fresh migration using the tool, you get to use and leverage the new environment right from the day one.
That's great, thank you. Another question here. If I need to migrate existing SharePoint 2010 on-prem to cloud with unaltered metadata, is there any step-by-step guide on how to do that without using a third-party tool?
My recommendation would be to use third-party tool. SharePoint, Microsoft's tool does justice, but the mapping would be better in third-party tool. That's why Novigo recommends Sharegate. So it would be worth the investment in terms of migrating based on your mappings and doing a right set of content organization online.
Okay, thank you. Were there any other questions from attendees? All right. Well, Akdas, I'd like to thank you for your time today. I think it was very informative, some interesting stuff that I'm sure a lot of people are going through or considering right now. I would hope to see you again on a future webinar. And again, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Nate, for the opportunity. Thank you, everyone.